Good morning.
Oh, it's a group quiz?
No, Emily, it's not a group quiz. We will have a quiz at the end of the class. So you went through your terrestrial biomes. Hopefully, you worked through that worksheet and you know characteristics of each.
The marine biomes or
No, now you can.
Good.
So-
I didn't do the marine biomes.
Well, now there's an aquatic biomes worksheet up, which you can do the similar thing for this week. Okay? So we're going to talk about aquatic biomes today a little bit. All right, but I'm not going to go through each one of the aquatic biomes. We could talk about aquatic biomes, and we could basically talk about the 8 of them, right? Think about different types of aquatic biomes. Go ahead. Give me an example of an aquatic biome. A wetland. What else?
A lake.
A lake, pond, ocean. We call the ocean pelagic zone, right? Which is basically the open ocean.
Bubbles or high.
Okay, what else? So we have 3. Rivers and streams. That's 4.
Swamp is a wetland.
Swamp is a wetland. We have what's called an estuary. What's an estuary?
Like space between.
It's an interaction between marine and fresh water. Okay? So that's, what else? We have the benthic zone, marine benthic zone, which is the ocean floor. Okay, we have coral reefs, and we have intertidal zones. Those are your 8 aquatic biomes. Easy, right? Huh? So easy. Each of those aquatic biomes has specific factors. Okay, we talked about, you went through the terrestrial biomes. We talked about factors that influence different terrestrial biomes, temperature, the amount of sunlight, climate, precipitation, etc. Similar things influence the aquatic biomes. All right, and we're going to talk about today about the zones of each aquatic biome and some of the factors that influence what the aquatic biome has. All right, obviously a lake is different than the open ocean, based upon the salinity of the water, the amount of oxygen, movements, currents, etc. Right? So you can just think about those 8 aquatic biomes and have an idea, a rough idea about what the differences are between the two. An estuary having a mix between fresh and salt water, all right? Mainly stagnant water, and it's a point for different types of plants and vegetation and organisms grow there. All right? All right. So, but many aquatic biomes are stratified into zones, okay? Based upon the temperature, how light penetrates the water, right? Obviously, you go to the drop-off in the Dominican, or in Dominica, which is an island in the Caribbean. It's not the Dominican Republic. There's a drop-off of come to an end of a coral reef, and there's a cliff, and it drops off. The water is basically goes from about 120 feet in depth to about 2,000, right, as a cliff, and then into an abyss. All right, so that's a harsh change, right? And as you increase in depth, what happens to the amount of light that can penetrate that water? It diminishes, right? So we know water refracts light, and therefore only allows for penetration through that. Light penetration then changes what organisms can grow there. What grows at the top or on the surface of water? Microorganisms that grow on the surface of water are called what? Algae, yes. What else? Plankton. You've heard the word plankton before? Phytoplankton versus zooplankton. What are they? Have you heard the word? How many of you heard the term plankton before? Okay, this is not new to you, right? Okay. What's phytoplankton then? I know it's Monday. I know it's 8 a.m., but come on, give me something. Throw me a freaking bone here. Okay? What is phytoplankton?
Photosynthetic.
Photosynthetic microorganisms. Okay. What are zooplankton then?
Non-photosynthetic.
Non-photosynthetic, actively moving, right, microorganisms. It's not that. Okay? So, what is the importance then for the light, the penetration of light? Why is it important that we talk about a photic zone, or the area of the depth of water where light can penetrate through?
That's where they can live.
That's where what can live, Drew?
Phytoplankton.
Phytoplankton, right? Photosynthetic organisms live in that area. So you have photosynthesis, which then is the basic basis for autotrophs to provide for energy, and then you end up with consumers, right? So these are producers. They're going to produce energy for the ecosystem, and then consumers are going to consume them in some way, all right? So you have the photic versus the aphotic zone, all right? Receives little to no light, okay? Altogether, your photic and aphotic zones make up the what we call the pelagic zone, okay? So, which is basically all of water, all right? Whether it has light penetrating or not, wherever the water is. Depth in the aphotic zone lies between the abyssal zone, all right, with a depth of 2,000 to 6,000 meters, all right? So there's absolutely no light penetration in the abyssal zone. It tends to end up being somewhat devoid of life, all right? Mostly. Okay? What else do we talk about what else is an important part of marine or aquatic biomes? What happens as things die in the ocean? They sink to the bottom. What does that represent? That ends up being organic matter that then dies and then provides nutrients for what we call the benthos or the benthic zone, the ocean floor, the floor of a lake, whatever, the bottom, if you will. Okay? And so the communities of organisms in the benthic zone, you'll see this in a second, are collectively called benthos. All right? And when you're looking at these slides in there, this is sort of adapted from the slides that you have. Okay, so there's some added, some changed around, compressed, etc., into a little bit of these slides that you have here. All right, so that dying, organic, decaying matter that has sunk to the bottom, a dead whale, for instance, sinks to the bottom, right? Provides, as it's sinking, is providing food for sharks, and eventually gets down to the bottom, and scavengers, crabs, lobster, whatever, will be there and remove all the organic matter that's necessary, and will be sort of recycle it. All right, that is called detritus. All right, dead organic matter falls from the productive surface water and is an instant source of food. We talked about dead organic matter in terms of a whale. What about in terms of a lake or a pond? Every year, there's an abundance of organic matter that falls into a lake here in the Northeast. What is it represented from? Every, say, fall, what organic matter falls into the leaves, right? And they sink to the bottom, they degrade, decay, and they provide a carbon source for organic matter, food source for all the bottom-dwelling organisms, right, in the lake. Okay, so here's your zonation, and you have the zonation in a lake designation. It's similar in the ocean. All right, so you still have a photic and an aphotic zone, whether it be in a lake or in an ocean, right, whatever aquatic biome you're talking about. And then you have the benthic zone, which is the floor, right, or the bottom. Okay, the pelagic zone makes up where all the water is, right? So basically you have the pelagic zone and the benthic zone, and then the pelagic zone can be broken down into photic and aphotic depending upon the transmission of light. Okay, and the abyssal zone is very, very deep. Okay, you have two different designations that you see in your lake versus the ocean. in terms of the littoral and limnetic zone, and then you have the intertidal, neritic, and oceanic zones. All right, that has to do with distance from shore, or distance from where the land and water meet. Okay, the littoral zone mainly is very shallow. Okay, the limnetic zone is deeper, and you don't have plants that extend from the bottom to the surface. The intertidal zone, what is an intertidal zone? What do you think an intertidal zone is? All right, so there's a change in tides, so that change for 6 hours in between tides, there's a big difference. Okay? So for 6 hours it may be exposed to water, for 6 hours it's not exposed to water, right? Exposed to sunlight, etc. So that's an intertidal zone. Neritic zone is basically shallow, and the oceanic zone is in larger depths, okay, and open water, if you will. All right. In most oceans and lakes, there's a difference in temperature when you go from depth. All right. This is what's called a thermocline. All right. There's a temperature difference between surface water and more deep water. All right. That change in temperature is called a thermocline. All right, and you may have, I don't know how many of you swim in lakes in the summer, or shallow, all right, non-movement bay or whatever it is. You may have experienced this. So you go out and you're swimming around having fun, and then you dive down for whatever reason, or you jump in off a boat, and you experience that it's colder water as you get to a deeper part. There's a change in that temperature that you've gone through and you swam through the thermocline. What is this a result of, though? How does this work? Why is warmer water at the top, the surface, and the colder water at more deep? Why does that happen? All right, so yeah, Lexi, yes, sunlight is producing, right? Mainly the aphotic zone. Sunlight is working to warm that water. What else? What else happens to warm versus cold? Right? Hot air rises, and cold air sinks. Same thing happens in terms of water. Okay? And when water gets cold, okay, it becomes its most dense. Remember the properties of water. It becomes most dense when it's roughly around 4 degrees Celsius. That means that the water molecules are most packed in together in a non-ordered fashion, like as it is when it becomes ice. Okay? So water is most dense at that 4 degrees Celsius, which means it begins to sink. Okay? And this is also directly related to the properties of lakes called turnover. Okay? So twice a year in spring and fall, there's what's called a turnover. So in spring, ice melts. Okay, what happens to the surface water then? Is it warmer or colder than the deeper water? It's colder, so what's it going to do? It's going to sink. The warmer water that's now been sort of heated by the earth underneath, okay, we call geothermal heating, now begins to rise, and when it comes up and turns over, what does it bring with it? What? Well, sediment, we'll say nutrients, right? From the bottom, nutrients come up to the top. The cold water sinks, okay? And that change, and what does the cold water, as it sinks, bring with it? Oxygen. Brings oxygen and different nutrients to the bottom, right? So that's called turnover. So that happens in the spring. What's going to happen in the fall? Same thing. The cold, right now we go from fall, now it's going to be colder air. The water on top, a little less sunlight. Water on the surface is going to become colder. It's going to sink. All right. The water from the bottom is going to come to the top, where then you end up with a turnover, and then that water will end up at the top, will end up freezing. All right. So this is a constant biannual mixing of water that provides oxygenation, changeover of nutrients, all right? So and it helps provide sort of a life cycle of the lake itself or the water itself. All right, so here's a diagram showing what happens in winter, and it turns over. So that's sort of that 4 degrees Celsius is an important temperature because that's the most dense that water can be. Right? That's the most dense form or the temperature of at the density of water. Okay, so then you see your thermocline, right? So summer it's pretty ambient towards the surface, and as you get deeper, it gets colder and colder. Right, further away from the photic zone. Okay, so what do you then have? We've already talked about 2 factors that influence different aquatic biomes. What? Well, depth, okay, which is related to temperature and the amount of light exposed to it, right? So temperature and sunlight already we've basically discussed those 2 abiotic factors that influence aquatic biomes. And then because of this, communities or populations, what organisms are present are influenced, right? So your aquatic biomes vary with depth, light penetration, distance from shore, position within the pelagic versus the benthic zone, right? Whether it's in the water or on the floor of the lake or ocean, etc. All right. Most organisms occur in the relatively shallow photic zone. Why? Most sunlight. Okay. So why do most organisms hang out there? So it's the most sunlight. What's the big deal?
That's where most of the food's going to be.
That's where most of the food's going to be from photosynthetic organisms, right? That's the basis for energy production for the ecosystem, all right? And the aphotic zone is extensive but harbors little life, right? So here are your aquatic biomes in their distribution, or some of the aquatic biomes. See, most of this, in light blue is your oceanic pelagic zone, okay? That's really basically open ocean. What you see in pink up there are coral reefs. Dark blue are, you have sort of intertidal zones that represent the interaction between land masses and water. All right, and then the dark blue, and you have your lakes. You can see the Great Lakes. All right, Lake Baikal over in Russia. All right, and then rivers and estuaries in certain different spots. Okay, you can see the East Coast. All right, in the Northeast is a large amount of estuaries that we have here. Okay, questions on that? Your distribution of different aquatic. All right. So your aquatic biome worksheet is posted on Moodle. All right, goes through the 8 different biomes, and they're also explained in the slides that you have. Okay, so go through those, and you will have a quiz next Monday on the aquatic biomes and whatever else. All right, and that would be your last quiz. All right. So now that we understand different areas where things can live, which is basically a biome, right? It is influenced by abiotic and biotic factors, what lives there, the temperature, light, water concentration, chemicals that are present, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right, and that directly influences what type of organisms can populate that area. All right, and so now we move up towards really what ecology is studying the interactions between organisms and the environment, all right, we have to look at the interactions between organisms and environment and how they limit the distribution of species. All right, and this is sort of what we've already sort of covered this in terms of when we look at biomes, their differences in temperature, plant vegetation, how that influences what other animals and organisms can populate that area. Okay? And when we talk about what populates it, that's what we're talking about species distribution. All right? So distribution of species is a result of ecological and evolutionary interactions through time. All right? So if things are, we're talking about predator-prey relationships. All right? Whether or not a marine iguana in the Galapagos, an iguana in the Galapagos can adapt to that marine environment, develop swimming, develop a way of expelling salt water from their body to keep their pH and water balance the right way. Okay? So ecological time is used to the minute-to-minute time frame, and obviously evolutionary time expands many generations. All right, so you could have, which one of these is more subject to transient changes? What's transient mean? What does transient mean? Transient versus chronic. Jason.
Transient's more like immediate, like faster changes.
All right, so transient is immediate, faster changing, short-lived. Chronic is long-term, right, over time. Which one of these, ecological or evolutionary changes, are more subjected to, say, quicker things? It's transient, so which one is going to be exposed to different transient changes? Which one is ecological, right? So if you go down here to Six Corners and there's a gas station down here at Six Corners, right? What if there's a gas leak in the tank that holds all the fuel in underneath the gas station? Is that a transient or evolutionary change? Transient, okay? What's going to happen? Gas is going to leak out, it's going to pollute the area around, right? The groundwater around it, it's going to have a transient effect. Over time, that pollution will be remediated through or microorganisms. It's going to go away over time. Okay? An evolutionary change is a volcano erupts and kills and removes a species. Okay? In some way, it kills all the vegetation around the volcano and removes a predator species from that area. Now what happens? Well, now that's a niche that can be filled by other predators. It could be the prey from that predator has no other factors, so its population can rise dramatically. However, events in ecological time can lead to evolution. Example being, again, we go to ecology and evolution, we go to the Galapagos because it's such a great example. All right? Finches, all right, with larger beaks could survive severe drought because they could use a different food source. They could break seeds that were present, right, ungerminated, and use them for a food source. When that occurred, now those finches with larger beaks have a survival advantage. They produce or they reproduce. They produce more offspring, and that trait is passed on. That is basically an ecological time that has driven evolution, right? Which resulted in an evolutionary change. Okay? So ecologists, they ask questions about where species occur and why species occur where they do. All right? Why is it that we have birds that migrate through the Pioneer Valley corridor? Why is it that moose are making a comeback in the Northeast? And why is it that moose are present in western Massachusetts and not in eastern Massachusetts. And how, if they are present in eastern Massachusetts, how do moose get there? How do they use the sort of parks and green spaces available to get to where they're going? Is it just one small population of moose? Is it a larger population of moose? Are they moving from one place to another? All right? These are examples of ecological questions that researchers can look at. All right? So, why is species X absent from an area? All right? Why are moose not present? Wolves, moose, whatever. Not present in Springfield. Okay? Does dispersal limit its distribution? All right? Does some biome factor of the biome, where they live, or where they can occupy space, affect its distribution? And yes, so say wolves, yes, there's no availability for prey. All right? They have to compete with other predators. And typically they are, what they prey upon is not present. So yes, the area is inaccessible, or maybe there's insufficient time to say that. All right? Or no, maybe dispersal doesn't limit its factors. So no, there's birds everywhere. Well, that's not a reason why there's no particular type of birds that are present in Forest Park. Do other biotic factors play into this? All right? Other species limit its distribution. Is there a particular bird of prey or predator that picks off yellow canaries in Springfield because they don't match the tree foliage? I don't know. Okay, that's just an example. Right? Do abiotic factors limit its distribution? Temperature. All right? Whatever prey whatever they use for a food source that is not present, so then they have to find where it is, and they only live where that food source is present, etc. Okay? And are those chemical factors or physical factors? Temperature, light, soil structure, fire, moisture, etc. All right? Or chemical factors, water, oxygen, water availability, oxygen, salinity, pH, soil nutrients, so on. All right, and that will directly, a lot of those will directly influence the plant life that's present in an area, which then will influence the animal life and other organisms that are present. Okay? So dispersal. Dispersal is movement of individuals away from centers of high population or from the area of origin. Right? So if you get a moose in Boston, is that an example of dispersal or distribution? Dispersal, because that's not where they normally are, right? You say, you find a moose in Maine, that's not that out of the ordinary, okay? That's part of its normal distribution. Distribution being sort of where it is, okay? We have transplants indicate if dispersal is a key factor limiting species distributions. Transplants include organisms that are intentionally or accidentally relocated from their original distribution. All right? Give me an example of an intentional transplant, an intentional relocation of something. Come up with something. Abby.
Wildlife preserves, they'll move animals, so
All right.
they can keep track of them.
So wildlife preserves will move animals to keep track of them. Like, for instance, Yellowstone Park. All right, they have a wildlife preserve. They have keep track of bison that move in and out of the area, right? Wolves, grizzly bears, etc. Okay? So if you get a, say, black bear that's running through Springfield, are they going to allow a black bear to run through Springfield? Probably not. Why? Could be dangerous. It's more of a nuisance than anything. Because what's a bear going to do? It's going to run through and knock over garbage, etc. And it's going to find a food source, and it's going to become used to getting that food source, that garbage or whatever it is, right? But that's more of a nuisance. And it could be dangerous, right? What are they going to do with that? What is an environmental protection agency or a wildlife biologist from the mass wildlife going to do? What's the course of action? tranquilize it and move it where? Somewhere. Back to, out west, we'll find Pittsfield State Forest or something, we'll put them out there. That is a intentional transplant. You're gonna move one animal from an area that it has dispersed or into it back to another area, okay? If a transplant's successful, and this is sort of another example, we're gonna move say there's no mountain lion that are present in southern Georgia, for example. But there are mountain lion that are present in Florida. And we want to move one of those, or a group of those Florida mountain lion into southern Georgia to help to spread and disperse the species a little bit. Okay? So this is sort of what we're talking about. If a transplant is successful, it indicates that a species' potential range is larger than its actual range. So if you only have a small population of mountain lion or Florida panther in southern Florida, I'm going to take a group of those, I'm going to transplant them into southern Georgia, and they all of a sudden they do awesome. They flourish, right? They end up going from 5 to 25 in a couple of years. What does that tell you? That small group of Florida panther in southern Florida could actually live in extended ranges. All right? They're not located, or they're not their distribution where they are is not limited to southern Florida. All right? And species transplants can disrupt the communities or ecosystems to which they have been introduced. Give me an example of a species transplant that is disruptive to the community. What are those called?
What are those called?
Oh, you can be either one.
Like anacondas and everglades.
Anacondas in the Everglades. What are they doing?
They're taking right away from the
All right, so do you want to rephrase that? Taking prey away from what? The alligators. Okay, there you go. Alligator, crocodile, big difference. Okay, but anacondas, other large python snakes, okay, in the Everglades. How do they get there? Mainly from pet owners, right? Snake got too big, let it go, or it escapes from whatever reason. But it finds this awesome habitat, this awesome biome in the Everglades, whereby it does not have a natural predator. Okay? And at that point, there's an abundance of prey for it to be around. All right? Allows them to grow bigger because there's no predator. There's plenty of available food source. They populate this is what's called an invasive species. You've heard that term before? Right? So anacondas or pythons, Burmese pythons, that have been introduced from whatever reason can be damaging to the ecosystem. They're damaging and removing the amount of prey and that's available for food source available for other organisms. Okay, and they're disrupting that community. All right, zebra mussels here in lakes that are in the Northeast is a big one. Okay, we have invasive species of plants that are found in different areas. Another example for snakes is the brown tree snake that was present went from the Southeast Asia and then found its way to Hawaii, and some actually have been found to sort of stow away on airlines and the landing gear airlines of airplanes, and then they get to the airport and they feed off of bird eggs, basically. Snake that lives in trees. And in many of the islands, there's no predator for that snake. There's plenty of wild birds that are around, and then it flourishes in that area, right? But it disrupts the community, the populations, okay? Biotic factors that influence the distribution of organisms may include predation, right? Predator-prey relationships. You already just discussed that. Herbivory. What is herbivory? What is herbivory? Right? Consuming plants. Okay? What plants are available for consumption? All right, so for example, sea urchins consume plants, they limit the distribution of many seaweeds. All right, mutualism, parasitism, and competition. All right, we know what mutualism is. You need things that are going to work together. Parasitism, right, a commensal relationship which one individual is harmed while the other flourishes, and then competition. There's going to be competitive, right, or an interaction. Two organisms are going to compete for some type of resource that's available. Questions on biotic factors up through there. All right, we'll continue with this on Wednesday. All right, and also like I said, the aquatic biomes worksheet is posted.